You're listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 334.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How's everybody doing today? As always, very excited to be here today at the end of this month, and we have a fun interview with Dr. Marie-Pierre St-Onge, who is an expert in sleep and food and nutrition and the connection between those three things. And she's going to share a lot of tips with us. But before we get started, I want to let you know that next week on Tuesday, February the 4th, we are beginning the next cohort of cookbooks on KDP. Cookbooks on KDP is my program where I teach you step by step how to publish your recipes and stories in a book on Amazon. So if you would like to learn how to do this, if you have recipes that are ready to publish, I can help you. We are going to work together each week to learn how to not only design, but edit and lay out and print and distribute your cookbooks so that you can have a cookbook ready before Mother's Day. So if you want to head on over to the show notes or this link, www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/KDP, you can sign up for this cohort. We won't do this again until the end of the year. We do 2 cohorts of cookbooks on KDP every year. So if there's 2 different times a year that are really great for having cookbooks come out, Mother's Day and then around the holidays. So if this is something you have been wanting to do, now's the perfect time to get started, and I would love to have you join us. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, my guest today on the podcast is Dr. Marie-Pierre St-Onge. She is the founding director of the Center of Excellence for Sleep and Circadian Research at Columbia University. Marie-Pierre is a nutritionist and pioneer in the field of sleep health. Her cutting-edge research combines her unique expertise on sleep, nutrition, and weight management to address overall health related to sleep. She is the author of Eat Better, Sleep Better, 75 Recipes That Unlock the Food-Sleep Connection, along with her co-author, Kate Craddock. For this interview, we talk all about overall health and sleep and the importance of sleep, the art and science of food, along with the art and science of sleep and the connection between the two. Marie-Pierre shares comprehensive strategies for getting a good night's sleep, foods that contain sleep-promoting hormones, and then we talk all about the book with the chapters and recipes and things that we can do and create in our kitchen to help us sleep well. So without further delay, let's dive into this interview with Marie-Pierre St-Onge. Hi, Marie-Pierre. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Hello.
How you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm happy 2025. Very excited to have you here to kick off the new year with a great conversation about a beautiful book and all the research you've done about food and sleep. Mm-hmm. But before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm an associate professor of nutritional sciences at Columbia University. I'm also the director of the Center of Excellence for Sleep and Circadian Research at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, and author of the book Eat Better, Sleep Better. So I have a background in nutrition. I did my bachelor's, master's, and PhD in nutrition at McGill University, really focusing on the impact of diet on cardiovascular health and weight management. And then got into the world of sleep from an obesity lens. So how is sleep related to obesity risk, and how can sleep be influencing your risk of obesity and cardiovascular disease?
Interesting. And so this is a beautiful topic for the beginning of a new year, because a lot of times people set out in a new year to improve their overall well-being, their overall health. But I wonder how many times people who are listening thought as a goal for maybe the first 90 days of this year or for this year to develop better sleep habits.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I don't
hope
know
we
either. I hope a lot too. And I think what I would like to do is talk just a little bit here before we dive into the book and the food and sleep connection. Tell us a little bit about sleep and what's new, what do we really need to know about this part of our day that we hopefully spend about a third of the day in?
about that.
Yeah. Tell
Yeah.
us what we need to know.
So I think that it's important to know that sleep is instrumental to health, overall health, and that how well you sleep impacts all aspects of your body, all organ systems. And there's aspects of sleep or lack of sleep that you feel and other things that you don't feel. So it's very clear when you don't have enough sleep that you have outward symptoms. You yawn, your eyes get droopy, or have problems keeping your eyes open. You may also realize that it's more difficult to learn new things, remember things, stay alert. But there are also symptoms that we may not feel. So we may not feel that our blood pressure is creeping up in a pre-hypertensive range, that our insulin resistance is also increasing. We're having a harder time metabolizing glucose, that our levels of inflammatory markers are also increasing. Those are things that we may not necessarily feel, but that place us at higher risk for chronic diseases. We've also shown that lack of sleep and poor quality sleep are associated with higher risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, but also hypertension and obesity. And when we do intervention studies, we find that people, when they're sleep restricted, tend to eat more and have a worse quality diet than when they get adequate, healthy sleep. So those are all things that happen when you don't get adequate sleep.
And you mentioned lack of sleep and lack of probably the time that you actually get or sleep, and then the quality of your sleep. What's the difference between those two?
Right. So you can have an adequate duration of sleep, but not necessarily a good quality of sleep. So if your sleep is interrupted very frequently at night, but you still manage to be in bed long enough to get 7 hours or more of sleep per night, then you would have a poor quality sleep but appropriate time of or duration of sleep.
Right.
So when we talk about quality of sleep, it's something that you can reflect on the next day, right? Do you feel refreshed? Do you feel like you've had good sleep? Everybody can recognize if they've had a good night's sleep. And usually it's one where your sleep is uninterrupted and you wake up feeling refreshed.
Yeah. And is there a length of time that most people should sleep, or does that vary from person to person?
That's always something that people want to know, right? There is individual variability. Obviously, not everyone needs absolutely 7 hours. Some people need more. Some people may need less. But I think that, most people should be getting more than 6.
Mm-hmm.
Below 6,
right,
it gets to be very short and associated with increased risk of chronic diseases. And I think a nice way to test that is to give yourself the time in bed to determine whether you could get more sleep.
Okay.
Right? Oftentimes, you just don't give yourself enough time in bed to be able to reach your sleep satiety, right?
Yeah. I think that's kind of an interesting thing that you mentioned, giving yourself enough time in bed. And I've thought of this concept a lot lately related to things that we need to do for our health, and how carving out time for things like this really is a gift to ourselves, not just now, but in the future. And I can see how sleep is totally related to that.
Mhm.
And how if we carve out the time to be in bed for a long enough period of time, we can really see if we can maybe increase the duration or if we need to. I think there may be a lot of moms listening to this show, people who have children, everything from infants, toddlers, school-age kids, all the way through teenagers who are driving. And to
Mhm.
me, that was always the period of my life where I felt like sleep was interrupted. Do
Uh-huh.
you see research that shows that women, because of that, if they're mothers, have more of these chronic diseases developing?
Well, women in general tend to report more sleep difficulties than men, and it may be due to greater caregiving responsibilities throughout life, right?
Right,
So to young children, but then later on to elder parents
right.
and other loved ones. So yes, women tend to report having more difficulties with sleep throughout throughout their life.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do find it fascinating that even though you may feel refreshed, like the next day, like you've had enough sleep, it's important to pay attention to those silent things that could be going on in your body, which I'm sure could be detected through lab work or something that your
Mhm.
doctor would maybe run.
Yes.
Yeah, to see what kind of what kind of things in terms of the silent, what might your doctor look for or what might you ask for to see if those are things that your body is responding to in a way that you don't even know.
Yeah, so just getting regular checkups, right?
Yeah,
With the just regular blood pressure monitoring, the glucose, lipid profile, or the routine tests that you would look for adverse effects
yeah.
of
Okay, very good. Yep.
poor sleep. Yeah.
So then also in this book, of course, what the book is about, since we talk about cookbooks and food books, is that your book talks about not just sleeping better, but eating better and the connection between food and sleep.
Hmm.
Tell us what the art and science of food has to do with your expertise. Well, you have expertise in both in the art and science of sleep.
Yeah, so I think that people don't necessarily realize that nutrients are important for sleep continuity and sleep maintenance. I know that, people realize if we say melatonin, people will associate that immediately to sleep, right? Oh,
Right.
well, I could take supplemental melatonin that will help me sleep. Melatonin is a hormone that regulates your circadian rhythms, that helps you, fall asleep at night and remain asleep and sleeping at the right times. But I think that what people don't necessarily realize is that melatonin is produced entirely from tryptophan, which is an essential amino acid. And what that means is that this amino acid must be obtained from foods. We cannot make it ourselves. There's other amino acids, so the building blocks of proteins that we can produce in our bodies, but not tryptophan. So that melatonin is produced entirely from an amino acid that must be obtained from foods gives you an idea of how instrumental diet is to sleep. And other cofactors are needed that involve magnesium and zinc and B vitamins for that transformation of tryptophan into serotonin and melatonin.
Right. And sometimes I think that people think, okay, well, melatonin, tryptophan, magnesium, these are nutrients or building blocks, so to speak, things that we need. But what does that mean in terms of when I go to the supermarket? Or what does that mean in terms of the food I might have on hand? What kinds of ingredients or food groups, I guess, would be something that you would say we should have on hand, or we maybe need to try to consume more of, or even have on hand if we want to have success with cooking the recipes in your book, Eat Better, Sleep
Mhm.
Better.
Yeah. So tryptophan is an amino acid. So it's found in protein-rich foods, but it's found in several food sources. The one that most people think of immediately is turkey. Thinking about the tryptophan from turkey, explaining your Thanksgiving the snooze, but it's also found in many other foods. It's found in dairy products and eggs and nuts and seeds as well. So I think that having nuts and seeds, those are ingredients that we may not think of necessarily as being sleep promoting foods, but they do contain various nutrients and including melatonin for some of them, um, as well as tryptophan, fiber, and they're a nice source of plant protein that may be improving sleep. They're also rich in phytochemicals, and what we're trying to understand now is also the importance of those phytochemicals for sleep as influencing the gut microbiome that can also play a role on sleep
Yes.
and melatonin availability.
Yes. I think it's fascinating when you start talking about, the gut and all the different good bacteria, for lack of a better word, in there, and how
Mhm.
different ones respond to different phytochemicals or
Mhm.
phytonutrients in food. And they need specific ones in order to thrive. And I think that's kind of like the cutting edge of like what's coming next, don't you think? In terms of just the way the gut affects everything that we do, including our sleep. Fascinating.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fascinating research. So let's talk about you've mentioned some of the foods, and we're going to talk specifically about some of the recipes and the chapters in your book. But when it comes to strategies just overall for what we eat
Mhm.
related to sleep, can you talk about meals or spacing or beverages or things just overall that we might want to think about in a category of what's in for sleep in 2025 and what's out for sleep in 2025?
Oh, in and out.
In
Okay.
and out.
Well, I think what's in is thinking about, your dietary intake throughout the day and not just the last thing you eat before going to bed as having an impact on your sleep. And if I think to me, it's often easy to pinpoint certain foods that can have an adverse impact on your sleep as one of the foods that you eat last before going to bed. Right? It's like, oh, I ate this before going to bed and now I had bad sleep. That might be why. But when we're talking about following a healthy diet for better sleep, I think it's important to think about what we eat throughout the day as being instrumental to how well we sleep at night.
Okay.
Just like, those nutrients need to be there at the ready when it's time to produce melatonin and the hormones and that are released for good sleep. Um, it's not just, eating something 3 hours before bedtime that will necessarily improve your sleep that night. It could have an adverse impact on your sleep. We know that from various stimulants. Caffeine, for example, consumed too close to bedtime, having alcohol too close to bedtime can have adverse effects on sleep. So I think paying attention to eating healthfully throughout the day for good sleep is something that we should really be mindful about.
Okay. And would one day make a difference for my sleep tonight?
Actually, we found that yes.
Yeah.
So one of the studies that we've done uh, was a controlled. We did a controlled feeding experiment where we had participants in the lab, and we gave them a controlled diet for 4 days, and then we let them self-select their food intake on a separate day. And every night we assessed their sleep using polysomnography, which is a gold standard sleep test to evaluate sleep and sleep stages. And what we did, we used data from this study to evaluate if there were differences in the sleep at night based on what participants ate. And we found that when participants self selected their food intake, they took longer to fall asleep and had less deep sleep than when we gave them a controlled diet that was a healthy, recommended diet nutrient profile. So we knew that there were differences in sleep based on different dietary patterns, and then we looked at what people ate during the day and see which nutrients were responsible for different sleep patterns. And we found that participants who had more fiber and less saturated fat had more deep sleep at night. When they had less simple sugars or simple carbohydrates, they had less arousals at night. And so we know that what they ate that day, which was measured in the lab, influenced how well they slept that night.
Interesting. So what about devices we can wear or our phones? Are those in or out in terms of being accurate and really providing useful information?
I think it could be an adjunct to other health behaviors or health trackers, but I also think that just checking in the morning when you wake up to see, how you're feeling, before looking at your watch to tell you what your sleep was like,
Right.
right? It
Right.
is a good parameter as well. So if you feel refreshed, but your watch tells you you had bad sleep, what, how do you reconcile those two
Yeah.
things?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to have this introspection in terms of how well you feel
Yes.
your sleep was, how you perceive your own sleep, and then maybe look for the watch for other patterns and seeing, okay, well, my heart rate variability was, lower, higher, and that might explain some of the feelings that I'm having, some of the difficulties I may be having with my workout today, or
Yeah. Right. So what about can morning people that like to get up early, they like the morning, they love that time of the day, can they be people who aren't getting good sleep? Does that make sense? Like if you are attracted to the morning time and you feel awake and alert to write or accomplish things in the morning, is there a better chance that you're a good sleeper, or are there morning people that are really causing a detriment to their health because they're getting up early?
Usually what we find is that morning people have more healthful patterns.
Okay. Yeah.
So I tend to have healthier diets, exercise more, have better sleep
Mhm.
than later chronotypes.
Yeah.
And that may just also be due to societal pressures where our work days start early.
Yeah.
So if you're a very late person, you're usually cutting your sleep short because you can't fall asleep so early, and then you have to get to work at a specific time.
Yeah.
So usually we find that healthier habits with people who have earlier chronotypes.
Yeah. I've often had this thought that my morning really starts at like 8 p.m. And what I mean by that is I think in terms of getting good sleep and thinking about getting good sleep, I think we have to kind of prepare the night before, maybe for what we need in the morning, what our next day is going to hold, and really start thinking about that the night before. And
Absolutely.
so, preparing ourselves, and if you feel like you don't want to have to shortcut your sleep with a long like morning routine, you can do several things before you go to bed. So, I think all of these lifestyle strategies and the tweaking things like that and what we eat can really ensure that we're given ourselves the proper amount of time to be in bed, like you said, and to see if we can get a longer duration and a longer depth of sleep, which sounds to me like, both of those things kind of go hand in hand.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
So let's talk about the book specifically.
Mhm.
There are 75 recipes in here. We have breakfast and salads, soups, you have side dishes, meatless mains, low stress evening meals, and sweets for sleep. A lot of people probably think, well, there bet there wouldn't be any sweets in the book if you said that maybe simple carbohydrates are something that we shouldn't have too much of. So why don't we one of the chapters that kind of I thought might appeal to the audience would be talking maybe about the low stress evening meals.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about your thoughts about that meal of the day, what we can do in terms of the types of choices we make to really ensure that we're getting what we need um, for a good night's sleep.
Yeah, so I think that those meals should have, a good source of protein, not necessarily meat protein. We have good variety of vegetarian options in the book with slowly digestible carbohydrates. So oftentimes they include a grain, a low GI, whole grain. Like there's a barley risotto in the book that's delicious. That's a lower GI type of grain than white rice, for example, and plenty of greens. So we often have lettuce and kale and spinach in those recipes. So those to include both a good dose of fiber and complex carbohydrates.
Yeah. And what about waking up in the morning? Tell us about breakfast and what that means for the overall picture for sleep health.
Yeah, so in our book, we tried to provide good options for breakfast meals. So some, that could be easily portable for people who are on the go. There's a smoothie that can be used for breakfast. Uh, Make ahead morning muffins are also great that it could be transported. And, you can eat them on the go and also more leisurely at home. One recipe that I really enjoy is the buckwheat porridge. This is not something that most people typically consume. Buckwheat as a porridge, but it's delicious. It's a gluten-free grain, and it's also lower in glycemic index. We pair it with dates. It gives a little sweetness, and it's got nice chew. So also a recipe that's also high in magnesium, with the tahini providing some tryptophan in there as well.
Mhm. And if people aren't familiar with buckwheat groats, also known as kasha. So a lot of times if
Yeah,
people go to the supermarket, I know that people might be familiar with kasha and what
yeah,
that is. And this does look like a delicious recipe. Also looks like it's topped with a little bit of Greek yogurt, some
yeah,
chopped almonds or sesame seeds, and then maybe a drizzle of honey, maple
yeah.
syrup, or date molasses.
Yeah. And you were talking about, sometimes prepping the night before for people
Yeah.
who want to extend their sleep as long as they could in the
Yeah.
morning, right? The overnight oats are some of my favorites for that. And there's a few compote recipes, and I've made the overnight oats with all of them, and they're delicious. Also with the roasted fig recipe. And so that I think that recipe is very adaptable. It has some turmeric in there, some ginger. Uh, so really trying to increase, the anti-inflammatory potential of the meals.
Yes. So let's talk about the sweets chapter. There's some really nice little recipes here for sweets, things that
Yeah.
help actually for sleep when it comes to
So
sweets.
I think so. So sweets is all on a scale, right? So what might be sweet to one may not be sweet to someone else. And I think this this is a dessert chapter, but the recipes are not excessively sweet or sugary or high carb. High GI, because we were talking before the show. I did all of the nutrient analyses for each of the recipes in this book to make sure that they, on average, would have a good health profile for heart health, for um, uh, low glycemic type of recipes. So they're not outrageously sweet.
Yeah. And one of them sounds really good, a sesame shortbread cookie. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's actually kind of a savory sweet in a way. That recipe has tahini and is put together very very quickly. Actually, it's a nice recipe to make ahead, and they stay fresh for a while. They actually get better after a couple of days as the flavors kind of meld.
Yes, they look really good. And there's also an easy stone fruit sorbet, which looks like you could make in the freezer, a banana chamomile shortcake, and
Yes,
blackberry plum galette.
yes, with a cornmeal crust.
Yes. Tell us about chamomile.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I always
chamomile
think of
people.
tea, like chamomile tea. I, think when I think of sleep, that's always one that seems like it's included in a mix of herbs you might use for a tea. But what is it
Yeah.
about chamomile that is it really true?
Well, there's some research that suggests that there is a benefit to chamomile. It's soothing. Anything that you can include in your routine that is soothing to you. And if a cup of warm tea from obviously caffeine free chamomile that may be soothing and relaxing uh, in the evening would be helpful for sleep. I've actually been enjoying that beverage quite a bit, the chamomile tea extract with the ginger. Just, you know, uh, warm up a cup of water and add a couple of spoonfuls of that before bedtime. It's actually quite good.
Yeah, I looked at that recipe. It looked like you steep ginger and maybe some little bit of honey and
Chamomile
some
tea
water
bags.
together, and then tea bags, and you keep that
Yeah.
in your refrigerator, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Well, so
then
you
you
steep them for an overnight, and then you remove the tea bags, and then you blend it. Yeah.
and you can blend a couple spoonfuls of that with hot water for the ginger. That sounds
Yeah.
really good. And of course, here where I am, it's been very cold, and of course, winter time. And I think something like that sounds like a really nice way to end the day. So,
Yes.
also one other
It would
thing.
actually be good just to drizzle on sponge cake or something like that.
Even without making it into a tea. That's a good idea.
Without making it into a tea, just drizzle it on a little ice cream or plain Greek yogurt to season a little bit.
Yes. No, that sounds good. Tell us a little bit about a feature in your book is some meal plans that you put together.
Hmm. Yeah, so we put together. I tried to put together different recipes, having in mind someone who's working, right? So making more complex recipes during the week that could have during the weekend that could have leftovers for the week, and that you could maybe take a leftover for lunch from dinner on a Saturday night, and then having the recipes that work together to have higher amounts of tryptophan and magnesium, zinc, B vitamins to all provide a healthy nutrient profile for the day.
Yeah. And I do like also, for those of you that can't see the book, there are nice lists of tryptophan rich ingredients, magnesium rich ingredients, melatonin rich, and then serotonin rich. So if you're like wondering, like, I wonder what foods might be high in these different uh, sleep enhancing nutrients, then you can actually look to these charts. But then I think also know that that's the benefit of the cookbook is it takes the foods that are on those lists and does the heavy lifting for you in terms of a meal plan and then putting things
Yeah.
into recipes.
Yeah, and I think the tables help also uh, people to customize some of the recipes if they need to. It's like, okay, well, I wasn't able to find this ingredient, or I'm not too fond of halibut, but I prefer, salmon. We can, use some of the ingredients in the tables to substitute some of the ingredients in the recipes, if or even create some of your own recipes from
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think that's something that people don't necessarily realize is that foods contain melatonin as well. So the plants have melatonin, and some of the foods that we prioritize in the book have been characterized, and melatonin has been assayed from these types of foods. And melatonin acts as an antioxidant in plants. So, depending on when they're harvested, they can have quite a bit of melatonin in them.
Yeah. So I think one of the takeaways for me, Marie-Pierre, is not just the importance of how you feel when you wake up, but that you're having regular checkups in case any of these markers of high blood pressure, high blood lipids, or insulin sensitivity are starting to
Mhm.
creep up, and that it might not be. So you may think, well, how could this be happening to me? I eat well, but it might be someone's sleep
Might be, yes.
that needs some tweaking.
Yes.
Yeah. Very
Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah. And this book certainly is a great toolkit for helping people to um, unlock the food sleep connection, as you say on the cover, with eating better and then sleeping better.
Thank you.
Yes. So, what's your research? Where is it heading you next in your work in 2025?
Yeah, so we're conducting research to look at the impact of diet on sleep as a mediator for other changes in chronic disease risk.
Nice.
So that's part of where we're at. We're also looking at sleep patterns, having stable versus unstable sleep patterns or more variable sleep patterns. How does that influence your health?
Yes, very good. Well, you certainly have given me some things to think about, and I'm sure our audience as well. And as always, we wish you nothing but the best with your work in 2025. And I do have a question that I like to ask my guests at the end, and it relates to cookbooks in your own life, books that you have used or grown up with, or books that your parents used or grandmother. If there's any favorite cookbook that has influenced the work that you do.
Well, so interestingly, I have one sister. My sister and I both love to bake, both love to cook. Our mother does not like to cook. She doesn't own a cookbook. Never really was into cooking like that, but my sister and I both love it. So my mom has given us cookbooks, and I always love to read cookbooks. So this is something that I'll sit, in my living room reading a cookbook. Lately, it's been mostly about bread. I love to bake sourdough bread, so I have a few tartines, the perfect loaf. I now have the new Big Book of Bread from King Arthur Baking.
Yeah, we had her on the show.
So I've been enjoying making different types of breads.
Wonderful. The perfect loaf and the Big Book of Bread. Did you mention another one?
Tartine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. And yeah, the perfect, again, with wintertime, it's a great time of year to start something new. And I think I'm going to explore over the next 90 days. Speaking of bread, we want to try some rye breads.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So something that my husband and I both kind of have an interest in. So we will be diving into that. And I can't help but think that the King Arthur Baking Company's Big Book of Bread probably has something about that in it. So
oh, yes. It has a few.
Be one of the first places that I turn to.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about how they might be able to connect with you online if they have any, want to learn more or follow up with anything?
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn and Blue Sky Social. I also have a website, basically my name, Marie-Pierre St-Onge with the hyphens, .com.
Okay. Very good. And I'll link to all of those in the show notes.
Thank you.
Can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. I hope you have a wonderful month, wonderful year, and that everybody tonight has a good night's sleep.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you. It's great to speak with you as well. Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.